Your brain is doing it again right now, replaying that conversation from yesterday, analyzing what you should have said, imagining all the ways things could go wrong tomorrow, circling endlessly around the same problems without ever reaching a solution. Psychologists call this rumination, and if you've ever told yourself to just stop thinking about something only to find yourself thinking about it even more intensely, you already know that overthinking isn't something you can simply decide to stop doing. But here's what decades of research has proven: rumination isn't just annoying. It's one of the most significant risk factors for depression, anxiety disorders, and a host of other mental health problems. And understanding why your brain gets stuck in these loops is the first step toward actually breaking free from them. I'm Sergey Popovici, and today we're breaking down the psychology of overthinking, why your brain does it, and 5 research-backed strategies that actually work to stop the rumination cycle. Let's start with what rumination actually is, because many people confuse it with productive thinking or problem-solving when in reality it's the opposite. Psychologist Susan Nolan-Hoeksema, who pioneered research on rumination, defined it as repetitively and passively focusing on symptoms of distress and their possible causes and consequences without moving toward active problem solving. The key word here is passive rumination. Involves going over the same thoughts again and again, asking unanswerable questions like "why does this always happen to me?" or "what's wrong with me?" without ever taking action or reaching any resolution. Research shows that rumination predicts the onset of new depressive episodes, maintains existing symptoms, mediates between risk factors and depression, and is related to reduced response to treatment. In other words, rumination isn't just a symptom of mental health problems, it's a causal mechanism that actively makes those problems worse and keeps you stuck in them. And here's what makes rumination so insidious: people who ruminate genuinely believe they're working through their problems, that if they just think about it enough they'll finally understand or find a solution. But research shows the opposite is true. Experimental studies demonstrate that induced rumination leads to more negative thinking, worse problem-solving ability, inhibition of helpful behavior, biased information processing, and impaired relationships. So every minute you spend ruminating, you're actually making yourself less capable of dealing with the very problems you're ruminating about, creating a vicious cycle that becomes harder to escape the longer it continues. Now let's talk about why your brain does this, because understanding the mechanism helps you recognize when it's happening and gives you leverage to interrupt it. Recent brain imaging studies using fMRI technology have identified that rumination activates specific regions in what's called the default mode network, particularly the posterior cingulate cortex and its connections to other brain regions. These are the areas involved in self-referential thinking, in creating narratives about yourself and your experiences. And when you ruminate, these networks become hyperactive and stuck in repetitive patterns. What's remarkable about recent research is that scientists can now actually observe changes in brain connectivity when people learn to reduce rumination through therapy. Studies from Ohio State University, University of Utah, and University of Exeter showed that rumination-focused cognitive behavioral therapy reduces both self-reported rumination and the brain connectivity patterns associated with it. This means that rumination isn't just a psychological habit. It's a brain-based pattern that can be measured and modified, which gives us concrete evidence that the strategies I'm about to share actually work at a neurological level. So here are 5 research-backed strategies to break the overthinking loop. Strategy 1. Learn to distinguish between rumination and productive reflection, because they feel similar but have completely opposite effects. Rumination is abstract, passive, focused on why questions that can't be answered. Why did this happen? Why am I like this? Why does everything go wrong? And it keeps you stuck analyzing the problem without moving toward any solution. Productive reflection is concrete, active, focused on how questions that lead to action. How can I handle this situation? How can I learn from this experience? How can I move forward from here? And it leads to problem solving and growth. Rumination-focused CBT, developed by psychologist Edward Watkins, specifically teaches people to spot when they're ruminating and shift into more helpful ways of thinking. The technique is simple but powerful. When you notice yourself asking abstract why questions, consciously shift to concrete how questions, and when you notice yourself dwelling passively, shift to planning specific actions you can take. This isn't about positive thinking or ignoring problems, it's about changing the process of how you think about problems from a style that keeps you stuck to a style that moves you forward. Strategy 2. Use the ABC functional analysis to understand what triggers your rumination and what maintains it. ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, consequence: what happens before you start ruminating, the rumination itself, and what happens as a result. When you track this pattern, you often discover that rumination is triggered by specific situations, like being alone with nothing to distract you, or by specific emotional states, like feeling inadequate or uncertain. And you discover that rumination continues because it provides short-term relief from having to take action or face difficult emotions, even though it makes things worse long-term. Once you understand your personal rumination pattern, you can intervene at multiple points. You can change the antecedents by avoiding unnecessary triggers. You can interrupt the behavior when it starts, and you can change the consequences by replacing rumination with more effective responses. Strategy 3. Schedule worry time, which sounds counterintuitive but is actually highly effective according to research. Instead of trying to suppress ruminative thoughts, which research shows makes them stronger and more intrusive, you designate a specific 15-minute period each day as your designated worry time. When ruminative thoughts arise outside of that time, you acknowledge them and tell yourself, "I'll think about this during my scheduled worry time," and then redirect your attention to what you're currently doing. Then, during your designated worry time, you allow yourself to ruminate fully, but with a crucial addition at the end of the 15 minutes. You write down one concrete action you can take about each concern. What typically happens is that when you confine rumination to a specific time and require yourself to generate action steps, the rumination naturally decreases because your brain recognizes it's not serving the function it thought it was. Strategy 4. Practice concrete, process-focused thinking through specific exercises that retrain your brain away from abstract rumination. One powerful exercise from rumination-focused CBT is the "How would you" technique, where instead of asking yourself abstract questions about a problem, you imagine advising a friend on how to handle the same situation. This automatically shifts you from abstract, self-focused rumination to concrete, action-focused problem solving, and research shows it's remarkably effective at breaking the rumination pattern. Another technique is to focus on sensory details and specific behaviors rather than interpretations and generalizations. Instead of "I'm such a failure at relationships," you'd think in that specific conversation, "I interrupted twice and didn't ask follow-up questions. So next time I can practice listening more." The research shows that training yourself to think in concrete, specific, process-focused ways rather than abstract, general, outcome-focused ways fundamentally changes the brain patterns associated with rumination. Strategy 5. Engage in absorbing activities that demand your full attention and interrupt the rumination cycle through active engagement with the present moment. Research shows that rumination thrives when you're disengaged from meaningful activity, when you're passive, when your attention has nowhere to go except inward toward your own thoughts. But activities that require your complete focus, whether that's physical exercise, creative pursuits, social interaction, or engaging work, interrupt rumination because your brain can't simultaneously ruminate and be fully absorbed in a demanding task. This is why behavioral activation, which involves scheduling and engaging in meaningful activities regardless of whether you feel motivated, is one of the most effective treatments for depression and rumination. You're not trying to distract yourself from problems. You're actively choosing to engage with life in ways that break the passive, repetitive thought pattern and rebuild your capacity for effective action. Now, I want to address something crucial about why standard advice to just stop overthinking doesn't work and actually makes things worse. Research shows that thought suppression, trying to push unwanted thoughts out of your mind, produces a rebound effect where those thoughts become more frequent and intrusive than before you tried to suppress them. This is why telling yourself "don't think about it" or "stop worrying" backfires. Your brain's monitoring system that checks whether you're successfully not thinking about it actually keeps the thought activated. The strategies I've outlined work because they don't try to suppress rumination, they redirect it, transform it, or replace it with more effective mental processes. And here's something important to understand about rumination. As a habit, it doesn't develop overnight, and it won't disappear overnight. Research shows it's a relatively stable trait that becomes more ingrained the longer you practice it. But the good news from brain imaging studies is that interventions like rumination-focused CBT can produce measurable changes in brain connectivity, meaning your brain is capable of forming new patterns even if you've been ruminating for years or decades. One study with adolescents showed that 10 to 14 sessions of RFCBT significantly reduced both rumination and the brain connectivity patterns associated with it, with large effect sizes that replicated across multiple research sites. This tells us that change is possible, but it requires consistent practice of new thinking patterns until they become as automatic as rumination currently is. If you're dealing with rumination that's contributing to depression, anxiety, or other mental health concerns, these strategies can help, but they work best as part of comprehensive treatment. Rumination-focused CBT, standard cognitive behavioral therapy, and mindfulness-based interventions all have strong research support for reducing rumination and improving mental health outcomes. If your rumination is severe, persistent, or significantly impacting your functioning, working with a therapist trained in these approaches can accelerate your progress and provide personalized guidance. The key insight I want you to take away is that overthinking isn't a character flaw or something you should be able to simply decide to stop. It's a learned pattern of thinking maintained by specific brain mechanisms, and, like any learned pattern, it can be unlearned and replaced with more effective alternatives. Your brain is capable of remarkable change, and every time you recognize rumination starting and choose to redirect it, you're weakening the old neural pathways and strengthening new ones that serve you better. If this video gave you new tools for managing overthinking, subscribe to Psychology by Stu Popovici, and hit the notification bell for more research-backed psychology that gives you practical strategies for mental health and well-being. Leave a comment below, sharing which strategy you're going to try first. Or tell me what helps you break out of overthinking loops. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Thank you for watching, and remember, your thoughts don't control you, but you can learn to control the process of your thinking. I'll see you in the next one.